As we get started this morning, I know we've had some lengthy announcements and whatnot, and that's fine. I will not complain about that, as long as you don't complain about my preaching and the length of my preaching or the length of the songs. I don't care about any of that. But I will say this. I do have a long lesson this morning, so I decided, given that we've already been in here for 50 minutes, I will cut it in half. And so if you want the rest of the sermon, you're going to have to come back tonight. And so that's what we're going to do this morning. We're going to start off in Proverbs chapter 14. We're looking at the blessing of being merciful. Verse 21 says this: "He that despiseth his neighbor sinneth, but he that hath mercy on the poor, happy is he." Now, I want to talk about this just in general before we get into talking about some of the specifics of this passage and the idea in general of being merciful. You know, some of these things have been have come up in class recently, and I plan on in the future talking a little bit more about this. But as things progress today, we will not cover all the things that I'd like to in the amount of time that we have. But in this passage, "He that despiseth his neighbor sinneth." Now, that's pretty easy to understand, right? If we despise, we hate our neighbor, then, we're in sin. But "he that hath mercy on the poor, happy is he." So you are blessed. Happy is he. That's the type of thought process for blessed. So you're blessed if you have mercy on the poor. So here's the question. What does it mean to be merciful? That's the first thing you got to understand. I mean, we talk about it sometimes, but mercy is this idea of compassion and kindness, charity, goodness, devotion, tenderness, helpfulness, those kind of a thought process there. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to show mercy. We're trying to show, in essence, compassion. Sometimes it's translated that in the New Testament. You'll have times where it says that Jesus had compassion on a certain group of people, and that happens so many times. Matter of fact, he goes in and he heals because he has seen this idea of compassion. He has it for other people. And so let's then ask this next question, okay? On whom should we have mercy? I mean, that's, I think, an interesting concept. I mean, what do you think about that? I mean, who should we have mercy upon? That's a good question. I mean, there are people that it's easy to give mercy to, right? And then maybe there are some that maybe not so easy to give mercy to, but what should we do? Well, first of all, we need to have mercy for those who are in need. If you look at Matthew chapter 9 and verse 36, it says this: "But when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion for them, because they were distressed and scattered as sheep, not having a shepherd." And so he had mercy on them. He had compassion on them because he looked at the multitudes, and he was moved with that compassion because they were distressed, number one. And then it says they were scattered as sheep not having a shepherd. That is, that they had no leadership. They had nowhere to go. They didn't know what they were doing. And so he had compassion, and so he did different things for them. But we should have mercy for those that are sorrowful. And there's plenty of examples of this in Scripture. Sorrowful for different reasons. Not just the idea of just being sad, but sorrowful for different reasons. Let's think about a couple of occasions of this. Number one, I can't help but think about this. Think about the unwanted, and specifically here, the leper that Jesus cleansed. And in Mark 1 and verse 41, it says, "And being moved with compassion, he stretched forth his hand and touched him, and saith unto him, I will be thou made clean." Now, this is really, I think, very mind-blowing when you think about what is actually happening here. And you think about the leper. What was the leper to do? I mean, when the leper was to go out in public, what was he supposed to do? Walking through a street, he would say, "Unclean, unclean." And how awful would that be, do you think? I mean, we think about that and go, okay, that's kind of a fact of life, but how embarrassing do you think that would be? You have to walk through the street yelling to everybody that you're unclean. Now, I know that it was much different here than where I was at the time. But the closest thing that I can think to something like this has happened within our lifetime that we could maybe understand was with COVID. And I tell you what, it's just amazing what happened. Now, where we were, I know here nobody had to shut down. Where we were, they were commanding people to shut down, and I really wish that we hadn't done that. But the elders decided that we would, and so we did for a little bit. We did our services remotely, and it was just an awful thing altogether. But you know what was interesting about that? We all had to wear masks of some sort, and that was just kind of commonplace. Well, you know what also was kind of interesting? I mean, probably the same thing happened here, but who wanted to cough in public? Huh? Anybody want to cough in public? Yeah, I mean, if you're just messing with people, maybe. But, if you went in public and someone started coughing, and I don't know if you're like me, but I'm kind of a sympathy cougher, the one that whenever you cough, all of a sudden I got a tickle in my throat, I got to cough too. And, I listen, that's not fun. And then when everybody's coughing, and then like if you just choke on your spit or something for a second, you start coughing, you're like, no, I'm not really sick. I'm not sick. That's embarrassing, right? But, what if the tables had turned? And the idea of the same thing given for the leper was given at that time and said, well, you know what, if you had to go out in public and you're sick, well, you know what, you better tell everybody that you're sick. You think that would have been embarrassing? You know how people would have reacted? People did that at the same time. I mean, if you coughed, and it didn't matter if you had dust in your throat or not, people would look at you and they'd kind of move away, like, I don't want to be near that person because they're probably going to get sick, and they're going to get me sick. And listen, it's much more extreme when you think about the fact that leprosy at the time was pretty much automatic death. I mean, it was slow, it was painful. You lost your appendages, right? Oftentimes you would lose your nose and your fingers and all these things, and it was a disgusting process. And nobody wanted to be around you because they didn't want to be sick. All those loved ones that you had. Think about this. What if you're married and you got leprosy? Can't see your spouse. What if you have kids and you have leprosy? Well, goodbye, Mom and Dad. You can't see your kids anymore. And then on top of all that, you have to go out in public and exclaim to everybody how disease-ridden you are. Now, let me ask you a question. Is that an embarrassing life to live? Yes. That is an embarrassing life to live. And being moved with compassion, he stretched forth his hand and touched him. Another question. How long has it been since he'd been touched? Now, we don't know this. We don't know. But if he'd been a leper for any length of time, it's been as long as he's known that he's a leper that nobody wanted to touch him. Nobody wanted to get near him. And so, Jesus stretched forth his hand and touched him. Now, I still remember this, and that same thought process with COVID. We were, shut down. I think it was for 2 months. And so for 2 months, we did not get to have services in the building. And I was recording all of my lessons, and we were literally taking old streams where we had a worship service, and I took the singing out of that, and the prayers and Lord's Supper. I took it all out of that, and then I spliced in my sermon, and then that's what we did. And that was not a good thing. I was actually in the same position that I am right now. I was up in a pulpit, and I was preaching. I was preaching to nobody. And the camera was so far away, I couldn't just stare at the camera the whole time. It wasn't even going to get me. And plus, the idea was for it to be as normal as possible. And so I looked around, as I'm doing this morning, to empty pews. And it was really weird at first, and I was able to finally do it. But I still remember that one day I had walked in. I didn't know that Autumn was doing this. She and I think a couple other ladies got together, and they got pictures of everybody, I guess off of Facebook that they could, and asked for pictures of everybody, and they printed them off and put them in their respective spots in the auditorium. And I loved it. I loved it. Matter of fact, I remember I almost cried. You know why? Because I'd not been looking at anybody. And all of a sudden I get to look at everybody. But it still wasn't them. It still wasn't that. And then I remember the very first Sunday that everybody was back. And those feelings were amplified. Thinking, it had been so long since we'd seen some of these people. We hadn't seen them at all, some of these people. And so for 2 months, we're absent from them, and then all of a sudden we're all back together, and it was overwhelming. We really didn't realize how much we missed each other. And that was just for 2 months. And yet this leper has been away from family for who knows how long. Probably much likely longer. And then he's touched by Jesus, and saith unto him, I will be thou made clean. Jesus looked at a man who was unwanted, and he showed him that he wanted him. He wanted to be his Savior. There's another passage that we could go to and look at something. Jesus goes and he talks to those and tries to have compassion and help those who are uncomely. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean people that, the dredges of society, the people that you don't want to be around. Not just somebody like the leper, but somebody that maybe just morally you just have no dealings with. You don't want to be around that person at all. And I understand that, right? Don't you understand that? We get that. There are certain people that I just don't want to be around. And you know what? Jesus was not quite that way. Even in that first century, there were people that the Jews just wanted to have no dealings with at all, and that was the Samaritans. Well, look at John chapter 4 with me. It's a passage we're all familiar with, but look at John chapter 4 with me, and we'll look at several verses here. Starting in verse 1, it says, When therefore the Lord knew that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself baptized not, but his disciples, he left Judea and departed again into Galilee. And he must needs pass through Samaria. So he cometh to a city of Samaria called Sychar, near to the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. And Jacob's well was there. Jesus therefore, being wearied with his journey, sat thus by the well. It was about the 6th hour. There cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus saith unto her, Give me to drink. For his disciples were gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman therefore saith unto him, How is it that thou, being a Jew, askest drink of me, who am a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Jesus answered and said unto her, If thou knewest the gift of God, and who it is that saith to thee, Give me to drink, thou wouldest have asked of him, and he would have given thee living water. The woman saith unto him, Sir, thou hast nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Whence then hast thou that living water? Art thou greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well, and drank thereof himself and his sons and his cattle? Jesus answered and said to her, Every one that drinketh of this water shall thirst again, but whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst. But the water that I shall give him shall become in him a well of water springing up unto eternal life. The woman saith unto him, Sir, give me this water, that I thirst not, neither come all the way hither to draw. Jesus saith unto her, Go call thy husband, and come hither. The woman answered and said unto him, I have no husband. Jesus saith unto her, Thou saidst well, I have no husband. For thou hast had 5 husbands, and he whom thou now hast is not thy husband. This hast thou said truly. The woman saith unto him, Sir, I perceive that thou art a prophet. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and ye say that in Jerusalem is a place where men ought to worship. Jesus saith unto her, Woman, believe me, the hour cometh when neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem shall ye worship the Father. Ye worship that which ye know not. We worship that which we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and truth. For such doth the Father seek to be his worshipers. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship in spirit and truth. And so, all the things that happen in this passage, you've got Jesus coming to the well. He's by Jacob's well. And the Samaritan woman comes, and of course they're going through Samaria. And as I've mentioned in our Wednesday night class, which if you're not there, you need to come because you're going to get more of stuff just like this. But we talked about this on Wednesday night where does Jesus go? And his first real work in preaching the gospel, where does he do it? Doesn't do it among the Gentiles. Where does he go? He goes to Samaria. He goes and he talks to a Samaritan woman. And so this is a double dose of things that the Jews just did not do. Number one, you do not have dealings with Samaritans. Number two, you don't really have dealings with women either if you're a man. That's just not the thing. And so this was a double thing that people would not have understood. First the Samaritan and then a woman. And so he's talking to her, and she's kind of perplexed by this and says, well, why are you talking to me? Because you're a Jew. I'm a Samaritan. And he asks, he says, look, if you knew who was talking to you, then you would have asked me for living water here. Why is it, she didn't understand. She didn't understand what was going on. And as the conversation progresses, find out that Jesus knows her background, his divine knowledge. He knows everything about her. And he tells her, go and call your husband. And what does she say? Well, I have no husband. Well, you answer that correctly. Because you've been married multiple times, and you're now living with someone who's not your husband. And so, this was somebody that was very much looked down upon in society. Now, this is not uncommon anymore. Now, when I was growing up, nobody really said anything. Nobody wanted to say if they were living with somebody outside of marriage. Nobody wanted to say that because that was looked down upon. But as I've gotten older, that has become very lax. And even in the church, I've found some people that have been okay with that. It's not okay. Jesus calls her out on this. And then she's furthermore stating, here's the Samaritans. The Samaritans, they have their own mountain in which that they would go to worship. And then in Jerusalem, that's where the Jews would worship. And so, which one is it? Kind of throwing out the debate. Which one is better? Is it our mountain? Is it your mountain? Jesus says, it's neither. I mean, right now, look, the salvation's from the Jews for right now. But there's a time coming, and it's really close, when true worshipers aren't going to worry about where they're worshiping, because they're going to worship in spirit and truth. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship in spirit and truth. And this lady, she goes on, and she goes back into town, and she tells everybody, she says, come and see a man who told me everything what I had done. Tell everybody, and she's going, could this be the Christ? Could this be him? And then that city flocked out to see Jesus. And that all started with Jesus going and speaking to somebody that nobody else wanted to speak to. We don't know what our efforts will produce. We don't know. I know that I've told this story before, but I think it's important right now. But there was a guy I know that's a preacher, and he said that he had a Bible study that he would go to the gym and work out. There were some guys at the gym, and they all started studying the Bible together. And there were 3 guys there that were interested in the Bible. And he said, I was trying to use this as kind of an outreach. And he said we'd go and we'd eat pizza or something afterwards, and everybody go to my house. We'd all talk about the Bible, he said 2 of them were really religious, and I thought, you know what, these guys are really great prospects, that they'll do really well, and maybe I can study with them and they'll become a Christian, and man, this would be great. The other one, the third one, was somewhat of a womanizer. And, you know, he said, I didn't really want to be around him very much, but he was coming to the studies. We would let him, and he was friends with everybody, and so that was fine. And he said, and so the studies went on for a while, and then after a while, people started dropping off. And so one of the guys I thought was a good prospect, he dropped off. Another one of the guys I thought was a good prospect, he dropped off, and then there was just me and the guy that was a womanizer. And he's the one who held on to it. He's the one that became a Christian. You see, we don't know what our efforts are going to produce. We don't know who's going to obey the gospel. And so we give that opportunity to everybody. And we don't know who's going to bring others to the Lord. And so we go to those even who are the uncomely, if you will. Also, we need to go to the neglected. In Psalm 142 and verse 4 it says, Look on my right hand and see, for there is no man that knoweth me. Refuge hath failed me. No man careth for my soul. Now, I think about some things that I used to think about when I was a kid. You know, have you ever heard the phrase, nobody likes me, everybody hates me? Yeah, I guess I'll go eat worms. You know, listen, I don't know why, but one of my favorite books growing up was, when I was a child, was Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. And he has a bad day, okay? He has a bad day, but you know, in the end, he's got a good family that loves him. But he has a bad day. You know, we can have bad days. We can have lots of bad days strung together. We can do that. But we got to ask ourselves, is it really that bad? And so we can keep ourselves out of this, but sometimes people feel neglected. And if someone feels neglected, maybe they're not really neglected, but they just feel neglected. And let me tell you something. If someone says that they feel neglected, don't try to tell them that they are not neglected. You know why? Because they may be able to see that they are not neglected, but guess what they still feel? They feel neglected. And so what you've got to do, you got to try to help them not feel neglected. Now, you may be neglected, and you may feel like David here and say, you know what? Nobody cares for my soul. But you know, there is somebody that cares. The Lord cares, and because the Lord cares, that means we need to care. And so we need to think about the neglected. We need to think about those who suffer. In Matthew 25, verses 34 through 36, it says, Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come ye, blessed my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and he gave me to eat. I was thirsty, and he gave me drink. And I was a stranger, and he took me in. Naked, and he clothed me. I was sick, and he visited me. I was in prison, and he came unto me. And, you know, of course, you know, the opposite of this, where, oh, well, how did we do this? Well, if you did this to any of the least of these, then you've done it unto me. And so what we do is we are merciful to those who are suffering, because, you know what? When we do it, it's as if we're doing it for the Lord. We're doing it for Him. And so we take care of those who suffer. All right, one more point, and then we'll wrap things up here for this morning. Why be merciful? You know, we looked at a passage from Proverbs 14 right at the beginning. Well, you know, that's kind of a sister passage to something in the New Testament. In Matthew 5, verse 7, it says, Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. And we've talked about this on several occasions. Also in Matthew 7, verse 12, it says, all things, therefore, whatsoever ye would that men should do unto you, even so do ye also unto them, for this is the law and the prophets. Here's the question. You know what? Do you want people to be kind to you? Yeah, you do. I mean, listen, I have met a lot of grumpy people in this world. I've never quite met an Oscar the Grouch, okay? I've never quite met anybody like that. But I've met some grumpy people, and you know what? It's kind of interesting. I've met some grumpy people that they're just really grumpy. And there's this one person that I remember, and I don't even mind telling you this story because they were just really mean to me. And I think they took it out on my son, and so Timothy was walking through the building and kind of walking fast, and this person yelled at him. This isn't here, this is somewhere else. This person yelled at him, and he came to me, and he was so upset by that and said, this person yelled at me. And I was like, well, I think I know why. And I was like, I'm never going to win this person over, but Timothy, let's work on it for you. And so you know what we told him to do? You just go and be nice to her. Just go and be nice. Every time you see her, be nice to her. I mean, it was lost for me. I tried as much as I could. There was no way of getting around it for me. But Timothy, whenever there was a day when they were handing out flowers, Timothy handed her a flower. And she was like, oh, well, thank you. And then every now and then he'd go up and say, how are you doing? Well, I'm good. How are you doing, Timothy? And we would talk to him a little bit, and he just kept doing this over and over again. Sometimes we would provoke him to do it. Other times he did it on his own. And of all people in the family, guess who she actually liked? She liked Timothy. And she was as close to Oscar the Grouch as I've ever met, okay? People want to be treated kindly. Everybody does. And so if we do unto others as we would have them do unto us, we're thinking, what is the best outcome here? How would I want to be treated? Furthermore, let me ask you this question in the same regard. How would you like to be saved? How would you like for salvation? I mean, most people in this room have that, right? If you're going to do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, well, then you need to go and teach others about the Lord. Because aren't you glad somebody did that for you? In Luke 6 and verse 31, it says, and as you would that men should do to you, do ye also to them likewise. All the golden rule here. There's a time when mercy should have been shown. But in the Bible, we have a lesson here where it is not shown. Look at Matthew chapter 18 with me. Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 through 35. And this is the last thing that we'll get to this morning. Matthew 18, 21 through 35. It says, then came Peter and said to him, Lord, how oft shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Until 7 times? Yeah, that's the perfect number, 7 times. And I'll forgive him that many. Jesus said unto him, I say not unto thee until 7 times, but until 70 times 7. Therefore is the kingdom of heaven likened unto a certain king, who would make a reckoning with his servants. And when he had begun to reckon, one was brought unto him that owed him 10,000 talents. But for as much as he had not wherewith to pay, his Lord commanded him to be sold, and his wife and children, and all that he had, and payment to be made. The servant therefore fell down and worshipped him, saying, Lord, have patience with me, and I will pay thee all. And the Lord of that servant, being moved with compassion, released him and forgave him the debt. But that servant went out and found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 shillings. And he laid hold on him and took him by the throat, saying, Pay what thou owest. So his fellow servant fell down, besought him, saying, Have patience with me, and I will pay thee. And he would not, but went and cast him into prison till he should pay that which was due. So when his fellow servants saw that what was done, they were exceeding sorry, and came and told unto their Lord all that was done. Then his Lord called him and unto him, and saith to him, Thou wicked servant, I forgave thee all that debt because thou besoughtest me. Shouldest not thou also have had mercy on thy fellow servant, even as I had mercy on thee? And his Lord was wroth, and delivered him to the tormentors, till he should pay all that was due. So shall also my heavenly Father do unto you, if ye forgive not every one his brother from your hearts. And so what does this man do? Of course, he goes, and he's got this tremendous debt. You know, none of us have been in debt like this man has. Okay, this man is in tremendous debt. And he goes and he throws himself before his master, pleading, begging, for just more time. That's all it is, more time. And then this master says, you know what? I'll do you one better. Let me forgive you of all this debt. Now, what should have happened? I mean, have you ever been forgiven of a debt? What do? The thing is not go get more debt. That's not what you're supposed to do. But what do you do personally? Aren't you happy? I can tell you story after story on this one. Both personal and other examples that I know. But man, it feels good to be forgiven of a debt. And if you've ever had someone pay a debt for you that you just didn't know that they were going to do it, and they just did it anyway, man, it's awesome. It is a great feeling. The relief that goes over you because somebody cared enough for you to take care of you. It's a big, big help. That's what should have happened, but this man instead takes opportunity. And I guess he goes, you know what, I'm going to go collect on my debts now. And he goes, and he's got this man who really doesn't owe him that much in comparison to what he had. And he's got this little amount of debt, and he goes, and he gets him thrown into prison. And of course, when the master hears about this, he brings that servant in. What does he do? He says, I forgave you all that debt. Well, now I'm giving it back. And you know what? You're not going to be able to go anywhere. You're going to be cast into prison until your debt's paid off. Well, guess what? His debt's not going to be paid off. It's a life sentence at this point. Debt's not going to be paid. He needed mercy. He received mercy. But he did not give it to anybody else. When you go back to Matthew 5 and verse 7, blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. If we're merciful, then people want to be merciful toward us. Well, that's part one. Part two will be this evening. Let me go ahead and tell you what you need to do. If you've not yet become a Christian, you need to take advantage of an opportunity that you have right now. We are here. We're here to talk to you about the Scriptures. We're here to talk to you about your life, your soul. You need to make things right with God. If you've not become a Christian, you need to hear, believe, repent, confess, and be baptized into Christ. If you have done that already, but you have not been faithful, make sure to make things right with God. You have an opportunity this morning for your brethren to help you out with that. Let us help you, and that you can make things right with the Lord and go away from this place with a clean heart. If there's anybody here that needs to respond to the invitation, it is now yours. Please come as we stand and as we sing.